drawing down the microchip inventory glut. I'm speaking today with Todd Burke. He is president of global business development at Smith. Hi, Todd.
Hey, Bob, how are you today?
Good. Thank you for joining me here to talk a little bit about the conclusions of Smith's 2024 Preview Market Intelligence Report on semiconductors. Based on that, Todd, what is the current state, as you see it, of the semiconductor market with respect to production rates, inventory, and demand?
Current rates, well, the supply chain has obviously changed from what it was 21, 22, right?
That's for
So,
sure. Yeah.
beginning of 2023, first quarter of 2023, we were still in shortage mode. Since then till now, obviously the market has changed quite a bit. Um, there are there's obviously a glut of inventory. Everyone's sitting on excess inventory right now.
Mhm.
Um, there are a few shortages, right? Some spot shortages. We see, even in the automotive space, some of the industrial space, there are some lingering shortages. They're not anywhere near what they were uh, throughout the spike of 21 and 22.
Mhm.
Um, there's some open market demand right now for MCUs, microcontrollers, for power management chips used in automotive and in industrial applications. Uh, Overall, though, the inventory is piled up. The market conditions have changed. The economy has softened. EV demand at least in the U.S. has waned. Still pretty strong in China and Europe,
Mhm.
but lead times are still extended for some of the microcontrollers, some of the power management parts, the PMICs,
Yeah.
and some MOSFETs. But
Well, it's
lead
really interesting that specifically you talk about automotive because that was the sector that was most begging for chips just a couple of years ago. They were the ones that had given up on their allocations, and then suddenly, when demand came back, there weren't enough chips because the gamers, game companies had taken their supply. But is that the reason why we're seeing the excess buildup now? Just because demand fell off the cliff for EVs? Why this sudden turnaround exactly?
Yeah, I mean, demand certainly in the U.S. demand has waned, right? I mean, you've got EVs kind of piling up right now on lots across the nation.
Mhm.
Um, Bear with me one sec.
Sure.
Where the worst excess that we're seeing really is in consumer electronics, right? Where
Mm.
the pricing levels have gone up, cost of living adjustments, they're still affecting, confidence in the market. Um, there's definite momentum in the computing space, in the AI space. Most of the demand coming obviously from cloud, data center companies supporting large AI, large language models,
Mhm.
and most of that demand is really in computing peripherals, not so much chips. Uh,
Right.
that NVIDIA has been in the news quite a bit, obviously. Demand for those AI applications for research development, the LLM, continues to be very heightened. Um, it's funny, NVIDIA's bottleneck is really the industry's bottleneck as it pertains to GPUs.
Mhm.
They've had issues with packaging their products as far as getting the dies into the current packaging type.
Mhm.
Um, and the fact that they own 90% of the GPU market.
Yeah,
Uh,
boy, they are the rising
so,
star of the last couple of years, aren't they?
right.
NVIDIA.
So,
Yeah.
um, as far as uh, any other shortages or market conditions, the only other thing really that we're seeing shortages on would be memory. In association, some spot shortages, some large capacity NAND, also driven by the AI, the
Mhm.
high performance computing demand.
Now, as you point out in your market intelligence report, this is an industry that's been subjected to constant traditional cycles of shortage and excess and glut and things
Mhm.
like that. Are we just following yet another traditional shortage cycle here, or is there something different about this one?
That's a great question. I mean, the one thing that's consistent, and when you look at the semiconductor supply chain, is uh, the next shortage is just around the corner, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
Uh, the COVID shortage, right? And you can look at that shortage, and there were a lot of different factors involved with that. Not only COVID, but there were natural disasters, there were industrial incidents, all that just seemed to pile on all at the same time. There was increased demand. I think we're in a natural cycle right now. You look at shortages through history. Smith's been in business for 40 years this year, right? And you look back at the ebb and flow of semiconductor supply chain over that time period, and there's been, by our count, at least 26 different shortages.
Wow.
All brought on by different reasons. Most is really brought on by a spike in demand driven by some sort of technology, tech innovation, whether it's software innovation or computing innovation or whatnot. I mean, EVs in the current cycle we're on now was one of the latest examples of that, right? Coming off of COVID, the high demand of EVs, or at least the perceived high demand, drove in part that shortage. Crypto mining can be pointed to. I mean, you go back years past, you look at the introduction of the iPhone, or perhaps Intel's release of a new processor, all would drive demand to a certain extent.
There was always something.
There's
It may
always
be something different, but the cycles repeat
Sure.
in a larger sense. I'm wondering though, Todd, during the height of the shortage just a couple of years ago, we saw many announcements by producers of opening up new fabs around the world, and especially some in North America and even in the United States. Of course, these are multi-billion-dollar ventures that take multiple years in order to stand up. I'm just wondering, did they move a little bit too hasty in regard to the shortage there, or were they making long-term plans that are going to play out and going to make sense in the years ahead?
Uh, Now you're moving into geopolitical,
Sorry,
right? Because no,
more than just numbers, but yeah,
right. But I mean, I think that's the strategy. Was it a knee-jerk reaction? I mean, maybe a bit, but I think, from a geopolitical standpoint, the decoupling that we're seeing, at least in part, I mean, that governments, the U.S. government doesn't want vulnerabilities in China and vice versa. So I think that absolutely will play out over time. And for the respective parties, I think they view that as the way to go. So
yeah.
They do take time. I mean, they're obviously very expensive. The CHIPS Act, I think has been in the news just recently of some new awards being handed out. It's a long-term play by the governments involved, but I think that will be it's a strategic move. So we'll see how it plays out long term, right? So
as you point out, Todd, you've mentioned various classes of semiconductors and applications. It really is an oversimplification to say what is a semiconductor market doing, because there's so many aspects to it, so many ways you can slice it. I'm wondering though, are there some chips out there that are quote unquote perishable? In other words, if they're in excess too long, do we get to the point where they are no longer of use because of the rapid advances in technology that draw on semiconductors?
Well, as you look at the inventory situation right now, I mean, they certainly degrade in value. The date codes on the chips matter. Most manufacturers have a date code restriction within a year and a half or 2 years. That certainly comes into play. And as new generation of product comes out, yeah, you're absolutely right. It not only degrades in value, but in usefulness over time. So it's an important issue. If you're an OEM sitting on inventory, you've got a couple of choices, right? You can either wait it out and draw it down as demand allows you, or you can try to move it to the open market and find another customer. Usually that would require some sort of a write down. So there's the financial aspect to consider as well.
So Todd, what is your best guess as to when we're going to draw down on the excess inventories that we're seeing now and get to the point where all of a sudden we're wringing our hands and saying we don't have enough chips? I mean, when's it going to turn around?
I wish we had the magic ball, right? But that drawdown process is happening right now. I mean, companies are and has been for the better part of the last 12 months. still a ways to go in my view. I think by the end of 2024, I think 2025 could be a very interesting year. Again, as companies begin to harness the power of AI and products and software and applications begin to roll out. I think 2025 could be a very interesting year for the semiconductor space.
Todd Burke of Smith, I want to thank you so much for giving us a peek into Smith's latest Market Intelligence Report 2024 preview of the semiconductor market. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Bob, thank you so much.